Hi there. Well, this is probably going to be the last video I do for this Kickstarter, except for maybe one after it's all done. Which, speaking of being all done, it's going to be done at the end of the day today. Uh, just before midnight is when time runs out, so there's only a few hours remaining to become a backer or find that backer for us who can bump it a little higher. We've already hit gold, so we're definitely going to be shipping out the books and everything. It's just a matter of how many books I can get in the initial run and um, what other marketing items I can pick up along the way to help sell the book. So thank you first and foremost. Thank you very much if you've already been a backer, if you've shared any of the links to the Kickstarter or the updates. Really appreciate it. I thought for this last one, what I would do, since I started off one of the earlier ones with reading the first chapter from my first book, Apocalypse Rising, I thought I would read the first chapter of my second book, which is Apocalypse in the Balance. Apocalypse in the Balance takes place 5 years after Apocalypse Rising, and 4 years after the newest book, which is Apocalypse Rising: The Coming Darkness. So the characters are a little different in this book, and it's definitely a different feel, but I think you'll still like it. So here we go. And look, my pastoral background, I thought I'd change it up from having to look at my wall, and I'm actually going to be reading from the paper instead of off the screen. So a little different. Just thought I'd give it a try. And thank you again. And here we go. Apocalypse in the Balance, Book 2 of Armageddon Angels, Chapter 1. Kohaku Hitaratsu's feet barely touched the floor as the two thugs dragged him through the lobby of the building that had been his until an hour earlier. He was neither short nor slight. By most standards, he was considered a big man at just shy of 6 feet tall, with a physique that most men his age would have killed for. But the men Albert Titan had sent to enforce the eviction had more in common with gorillas than men. He tried to look up at one of them, but the moment he turned his chin upwards, he was punched hard enough to make him hang his head low as the trek to the front door continued. He stared at the black slate tiles of the lobby and smiled inside. It hurt too much to smile on the outside. They were installed at his request, and they had never failed to inspire him. The building bore his name for more than 20 years, even if he had never bothered to buy it, and he took pride in its appearance. He hated Titan, both professionally and personally, but he hoped the man at least took care of his tower. Kohaku had been Titan's headquarters only once. Titan's headquarters only once, but it had been enough. Something about the place left him unsettled, as if walking through the doors had coated him with a thin layer of filth that no shower could hope to remove. The meeting had been a formal one, but it was most unpleasant. Albert announced his intentions to buy Hitaratsu Incorporated, and he made no bones about the fact that he would resort to a hostile takeover if necessary. Kohaku had laughed. He had taunted the man, secure in his belief that his illegal enterprises would be more than enough to keep his legitimate company out of the hand of Wall Street's golden boy. Little had he known that the man was the dirtiest of them all. His escort came to a stop before the revolving door in the lobby. Kohaku looked around and saw his security team standing by, watching their former employer get tossed out. He did not expect tears, but they could have at least pretended that they were going to miss him. He struggled to think of one of their names, but nothing came to mind. Kohaku caught his reflection in the glass of the door and shook his head. Who was the broken-down, middle-aged man held up by a pair of thugs? Could not possibly be him. Where had the gray hair come from? When had his eyes lost the edges that men feared and women desired? He was out of shape, soft around the edges, and as his body went, so had his empire. Time to leave, loser, grunted one of the thugs as he kicked Kohaku in the ass, sending him reeling forward until he slammed into the door frame. The impact created a large gash in the middle of his forehead. Blood flowed down his face and stained his white shirt and pale gray business coat. Not so rough, said the second man. The boss wouldn't want his new floors stained. Kohaku felt himself lifted by the back of his collar and placed inside the revolving door. You better start walking or I'll spin the wheel and you'll end up with more cuts on your head. The brutes laughed at Kohaku, pushed the door, and walked into the street. Their laughter rang like a funeral bell in his ears. His defeat was complete. The business he had spent his life building was stolen from him. They even denied him the solemn dignity of walking out of the building. Kohaku stood on the sidewalk, numb, unaware of the crowds streaming by as he considered his next move. Going home seemed to be the logical step, but he had no easy means to do so. For years he had taken the company limousine everywhere, and the only credit cards he had were company cards. Kohaku pulled out his wallet and was relieved to see some cash inside. He could not remember the last time he had paid for anything with something other than plastic or a corporate check. Kohaku shrugged his shoulders and stepped up to the curb. Cab after cab sped by, ignoring the attempts to hail them. "Taxi!" he yelled at each one as they passed by. He waved his hand and his briefcase with no luck. He even considered stepping into the street in order to force one of them to stop or hit him, but he had not been pushed to the point of suicide yet, so he continued flailing about like a rube fresh from the country. "You'll never get one that way," said a man behind him. Kohaku was almost afraid to look, but he was not about to let the worst day of his life turn him into a coward. He turned to face the speaker and found himself looking at a tall 20-something. He was poorly dressed with a mop of shaggy blonde hair that made him look younger than he was. Kohaku might have ignored him completely if it were not for the pale blue eyes. He could not remember ever seeing such a color, but something about the kid made him think they had met before. "Do I know you?" he asked. "I don't think so," he said with a smile, but we might have run into each other before." Something about the way he smiled back made Kohaku think that the young man was holding something back. "I'm down here all the time, or I used to be anyways." "That must be it," Kohaku said, though he seriously doubted it. He never used the front door, preferring the anonymity that parking garage and tinted windows of the limousine provided, and he rarely paid attention to the people milling about on the street. "I'm sorry, what was your name?" "You can call me Justin," the kid said. "Let me help you here, all right?" It was degrading to need assistance. On any other day, Kohaku would have stared the kid down and managed for himself, but that day was no ordinary day. "Thanks, I appreciate it," he mumbled, trying to sound grateful. "It's been a rough one." "Yeah, it looks like it," Justin said without malice. "All you have to do is stick your arm out there and be assertive, like this," Justin said as he stepped to the curb, stuck his arm out, and yelled, "Taxi!" For a brief moment, Kohaku thought he saw a white light surround the young man, but he shook off the notion, attributing it to the reflection of the sun off one of the many skyscrapers in the area. A cab screeched to a halt in front of them, and the passenger window rolled down. "Where to?" the cabbie asked. 1205 Jerusalem Way, Kohaku said as he opened the rear door. He turned to thank Justin, but the kid was nowhere to be found. He looked about the crowd, hoping to spot his savior, but he was gone. Kohaku shook his head and got in the cab. "My name is Carl, and I'll be your driver today," the smiling cabbie said as he pulled away from the curb. "Thank you for stopping, Carl. I didn't think I was ever going to get a ride home," Kohaku said as he looked around the interior of the cab. A golden cross sat on the dashboard above the meter, and pictures of angels decorated the free space of the cab's interior. One of the pictures he recognized. It was a blurry picture that had gone viral in the media. It was supposed to be proof that angels really existed, and Kohaku had to admit the testimonial pictures seemed convincing, but he had never been a man of faith. He had grown up on the streets of New Arcadia, and trusting in some higher power was a sure way to get yourself killed. "I was there, you know," Carl said. "Excuse me?" "I was there when that picture was taken." "He jumped into the air, spread his wings, and winked at me," Carl responded. "It was almost 5 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday." The cabbie turned down a side street and continued talking. "I should have been dead. My cab slammed into the side of a building hard enough to turn the whole thing into a block of broken parts. But I survived." "I remember hearing about that," Kohaku said. "You were thrown out of the car. They said it was a miracle." "They were right, sir," Carl said. "My seatbelt was on, my door was jammed closed by the impact. There was absolutely no chance that I was thrown from that cab. But they found me on the street beside it, and all I had to show for it was a handful of bruises. I was never a church-going man before that day, but now I feel like I can't get there often enough." "You sound like a true believer," Kohaku said. "If you'd seen it, you would be too," Carl said. "There's a lot more weirdness in the world now, and I would rather be on the right side of things." Kohaku looked away from the pictures, met Carl's gaze in the rearview mirror, and said, "I hadn't really noticed." "Have you been living in a cave or something?" Carl asked. Kohaku laughed and thought of his office with its polarizing windows, lack of electronics, and dark lighting. "Yeah, I suppose I have been," he said. "My work kept me busy, but I suppose I'll have more time to myself now." Carl looked at him in the mirror, and his eyes softened. "Geez, I'm sorry, man. It's a tough time to be out of work." "Yes, it is." Kohaku looked out the window at the houses going by, and he recognized the neighborhood. He was getting close to home. "I'll take some time to figure out what to do next. I worked my way up from the bottom once before, so I'll just do it again." "That's the spirit," the cabbie said. "Just remember that you don't have to do it alone." Carl briefly looked over his shoulder and said, "Take one of my cards. If you ever need some help or a cab, I'm only a phone call away." Thank you, Carl, Kohaku said. I appreciate that. He grabbed a card and stuck it in his coat pocket. The good thing is I don't have to do it alone, he smiled to himself. My wife has been with me through worse times than this. With her by my side, I know I can make a comeback. He laughed and said, Who knows, maybe I'll even get back what's mine. The cab pulled into the long driveway of Kohaku's estate. Business had been good to him, and he had bought a house befitting his station, even if he spent most of his time in the office, but his wife loved the home, so that was enough for him. Well, it looks like you'll be starting from a little higher up than the bottom this time, Carl said as he pulled into the front of the house. Yeah, I suppose you're right. Kohaku pulled all of the cash from his wallet and handed it to Carl. Thank you again, Carl. I hope you have a good day. Every day you wake up is a good day, mister, Carl said with a smile. Kohaku got out, shut the door, and Carl drove off. Kohaku Hitaratsu watched the cab disappear through the trees that lined the far side of his drive and smiled. There might have been a time in his life when he had been so optimistic, but it had long since passed. Maybe losing his company would provide the opportunity for Kohaku to regain that long-lost sense of invincibility. This day could well turn out to be the best day of his life. He smiled a genuine smile, walked up the steps to his front door, and opened it with a new sense of hope. Now, there you go. Chapter 1. So, anyways, I hope you liked it. I know my reading isn't always the best, but I'm working on that. But if you have a chance, please check out the campaign. If you're just getting the video, become a backer. It's good again till midnight tonight. It's November the 8th. Not quite midnight. It's like 11:46 or something like that. So and that's Eastern time. But please give it a look. The books will be coming out probably in about a month from now, because it's going to take a couple more weeks to finish the editing up, get the orders in, and for everything to go through. So they'll be there in time for Christmas. If you want to do gifts, we have one of the campaign rewards actually has them gift wrapped by my wife, because I am a horrible gift wrapper, no question, but my wife is amazing. She wraps a package like it's a piece of art. It's beautiful. It's crazy. I guess that's it for the day. I don't think I'll do another video until, like I said, after the campaign's done, so I can just do some updates maybe. But if you have a chance, be a backer. I really appreciate it, and I think you'll really like the book or books if you do one of the rewards that gives you more books. So again, Eric Swett, nice to meet you. Have a good one.